It all began beneath this silent mound. For 9,000 years, this earth kept humanity's strangest secret in its heart. When the first shovel hit in 1958, all known history was torn apart like paper. What stood before us was not a village, but a giant labyrinth. As archaeologists gazed into that dark void, into the depths of a grave, a 9,000-year silence was shattered by a terrifying ritual. In this strange world, there were no roads or doors. The city was sealed together like a giant labyrinth. Life was on the rooftops. People lived their daily lives on these massive terraces that resembled public squares. So, what was the great fear that cut off 10,000 people from the outside world and trapped them in this breathless order? When science broke this deep silence and gazed into that dark void, into the depths of a grave, a 9,000-year silence was shattered by the coldness of the bones emerging to light. What we encountered was not just death. It was the first evidence of a terrifying and ancient ritual. To enter a home, you had to step down into the unknown through that narrow, dark hole in the sky. Every rung of the wooden ladder pulled you away from the outer world and left you in the arms of a smoky silence. When you reached the bottom, neither light nor doors welcomed you. There was only the suffocating narrowness of the walls. These houses were not just shelters. They were windowless, breathless cells where 10,000 people were trapped. Belongings were few, but silence was plenty. Everyone shared the same narrow space, the same dim light, and the same fate. The walls were so close. There was no private life here, nor a secret corner. Everyone was watching each other, every single moment. No one could be different here. There were no leaders, no slaves, but there was no freedom either. 10,000 people moved as a single soul. Everyone slept at the same time, lived the same way, and bowed to the same rules. So, what great fear sustained this perfect order that even a king could not provide? Walls were not just mud. They were woven with the bones of the wild. Giant bullheads were like gods, watching you every moment. Red paint was not just a decoration. It was the trace on the wall of a ritual, of shed blood, and of untamable fears. They did not conquer nature. They chose to imprison savagery in the deepest corner of their home and sleep beside it. Watch where you step. In these houses, the floor was not just earth, but a grave cover. They buried their loved ones right beneath where they slept, in a fetal position, as if in the womb. Death was not a parting here. The living and the dead were sealed together forever under the same roof. The story of some dead did not end with burial. They would separate the skulls from the bodies and give them a new life. They rebuilt their ancestors' faces with clay. They made new eyes from mud and pigment so they would never forget. These masks watched those sitting on reed mats by the fire. Death was right there, by the hearth, inside the family every evening. In this dark world, power came not from gold, but from a black glass born in the heart of the volcano, obsidian. They crafted it so sharply that obsidian was both a hunter's most loyal friend and the most perfect blade, two-part skin from flesh. But obsidian was not just for cutting. It was a black, misty mirror where humans first encountered their own dark reflection. The true masters of the steppe were not them. but the leopards watching from the shadows. They could not domesticate this savagery, but by carving it onto their walls, they turned fear into a power imprisoned within their homes. Wearing a leopard skin was not just clothing, it was the only way to possess and rule the most predatory spirit of nature. It all began with these symbols: power, belief, and fear. These walls you touch are silent witnesses of 9,000 years. This is Çatalhöyük, the first metropolis with no streets and doors closed to the world. You had only one way in, this dark opening on the roof. Outside was a wild world. Inside, a life of claustrophobia. Why were they hiding? From the gods above, or from each other? Sunlight could only seep through this hole. Just like life, narrow and limited. Their weapons were made of volcanic glass, as sharp and dark as obsidian. But the real mystery was hidden in the floors of these empty rooms. 10,000 people were breathing inside a giant labyrinth. They are still there, watching us and guarding our secrets. And one day, when the sky filled with fire, everything would change. Watch where you step, because they are right beneath you. They slept together. Death was not an end here. The hardest goodbye was indoors. Every house was a cemetery. He was following his ancestors. This silence has a price. Even the walls are made of bone. Why didn't they let them go? We are burying our secrets. Çatalhöyük, City of the Dead. This massive mound has kept humanity's greatest secret in its heart for 9,000 years. Today, science dives into the heart of this silent giant to map the digital past. With every brushstroke, we return to a unique world, without property or hierarchy. There were no masters in these houses. Everyone was equal under the same sky. Art was coming back to life with the blood of the earth, through natural pigments. Yet life lived in the shadow of Mount Hazen, always ready to vent its fury. These lines on a wall were the first known landscape painting in history. Cleanliness was an obsession. They sealed their walls with fresh white plaster every year. They were devoted to their ancestors, burying them right under the rooms where they slept. As the first seeds of farming were sown here, humanity learned to domesticate nature. 10,000 people wrote history on the roofs of this streetless giant labyrinth. 10,000 people wrote history on the roofs of this streetless giant labyrinth. And now technology is finally beginning to break this deep, millennial silence. But then, the climate changed and rivers ran dry. The protective fire of the city slowly began to fade. The massive population of 10,000 succumbed to nature. All that remained were the soot marks on the walls. People abandoned the city with fear and uncertainty. After 2,000 years, Çatalhöyük sank into silence. They even left their sacred figurines in the dust. No one knows exactly where they went. The roofs were sealed, never to be opened again. The last meals were never eaten. The pots remained empty. The city today is still waiting to speak beneath the earth. We are in a place where time and space lose meaning. We are touching the first great secret of humanity, 9,000 years ago. These bones, these lands, are not just remains. They are silent witnesses to a forgotten fear, a suppressed scream. But to reach this secret, you had to step down into the unknown, through that narrow, dark hole in the sky. Çatalhöyük fell silent. That great roar that lasted for thousands of years gave way to the dust carried by the wind. But this was not an end. It was the beginning of a vast void. Humanity escaped these narrow walls and set out on that great march that would last 1,000 years. In the next episode, what happened after Çatalhöyük? How did humanity change in that great void? We are going to that new and wild world called by the rivers, Mesopotamia. Stay tuned.